Welcome Archana Agarwal ji and welcome our today's speaker Arupa Banik ji and welcome today's participation. Today is the 54th session of Golden Charcha, which initiative of our regional chairman Shri Vishnu Kumar Tulsian ji. It is initiative for the speaker who's want to speak and interact with our community and today's special address given by the Archana Agarwal ji. I request Archana Agarwal ji to give a special address for today's topic. Over to Archana ji.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. Good evening, Arupa ma'am. And as you all know, the topic for today is audit documentation and how it is helpful in audit. So basically, audit documentation, as we know as the working papers, it is the procedures that performed, relevant documents and evidences obtained, and the conclusions that we reach during the engagement that we are performing, and the it is the backbone of our audit and the primary evidence for any audit opinion or the review that we provide as an auditor. And it is well known that audit documentation is very important in with the purview of evidences to our conclusions, support to our opinions, the legal defense that we have against any of the um, any if we have against any future actions, and it also provides a major backbone for future planning and accountability of our work. And we all are well aware of the essays, standard on auditing that the institute has provided us on audit documentation. And Arupa ma'am will surely provide us a detailed knowledge of this. So I welcome Arupa ma'am and request her to take over the session.
Thank you, Archana ji. So
इंटरप्ट करता हूँ रूपा जी 2 मिनट और दीजिए मेरे को आप.
हाँ.
Thank you Archana ji for your special address. Today's speaker is our Arupa Banik ji. Arupa is an associate member of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. She is a certified information system auditor and forensic accountant and fraud detector. She had been employed with Pricewaterhouse and Company LLP, where she rendered service to multinational bank, foreign institutional investors, and fast-moving consumer goods sector from the perspective of regulation in Bangladesh. Arupa is a practicing chartered accountant, also trained defense professional of the Government of India and officials of the Crime Bureau of India on the intrigue of financial statement fraud and how to effectively detect them. She regularly contributes to various journals and magazines related by the Eastern India branch of ICAI, the Institute of Internal Auditor, Calcutta chapter. Arupa is also an employed career counselor with the Committee of Career Counseling ICAI. She is a member of the Board of Governance of the Institute of Internal Auditors, Calcutta chapter. She is a special invitee to the subcommittee of Eastern India Regional Council of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. After all, she is our younger sister and request to start our session today. Hand over to Arupa.
Thank you so much, Chimpu ji. And I would also like to thank Archana for setting the tone of this session. And she has made my work a lot easier by actually introducing what is audit documentation and what exactly I will be covering. So I'll just quickly move over to the presentation. I'll share my screen. Okay. Okay, is my screen visible? Screen
Yes, it is visible. Yes,
Okay,
it
okay,
is
thank you.
visible.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah. Okay, so you know how Archana ji, she introduced the entire concept of audit documentation. I would like to begin this session by again reiterating that audit documentation is so fundamental to our entire audit process, so that it's actually the backbone or the anchor that holds the entire audit procedure together in one place. In this slide, as you can see, this flow chart, it captures the different stages of audit, right from acceptance, then planning, execution, and lastly, the completion. And you know what? Audit documentation plays a crucial role in all these four steps that have been given. So, and because it is so important, we have a special or a specific standard of auditing dedicated to audit documentation called SA 230 audit documentation, which which stipulates what are the expectations and what are the roles and responsibilities of auditors when it comes to audit documentation. And trust me, this is very important because we as auditors, we tend to take a lot of liberty in terms of what shall be documented, what may not be documented, and what need not be documented. But this is where the standard of auditing, it comes as a guiding light, which tells us it is nowhere, it cannot be an exhaustive list, but what it mentions is it mentions the bare minimum that we as auditors can do. So what we will do is we will move on to the important provisions of the SA 230 audit documentation. And the major objective of the session is that there are many provisions of SA 230 that we know, and some I'm very sure which will become much more clearer after this today's session. So I request all of y'all to follow the session, and of course, if you have any queries at the end of the session, we can take it up. Okay. So let me begin. So before dealing with the important provisions of the SA 230, I think it is very important that first all of us must know some important definitions which are covered in this standard. Number one, what is audit documentation? Archana ji has already mentioned, but again, I am also going through it. As per the standard of auditing, see, we know what is audit, what entails the audit process. It entails performing audit procedures so that we can obtain evidences, and based on those evidences collected, we can draw a conclusion. So, audit documentation is a record of that entire process. So, it is a record of the audit procedures performed, the evidences obtained, and finally, the conclusions reached. Done. Audit documentation, that is what is the prescribed definition as per SA 230. Second important definition is audit file. Now, when I just look at the term file, okay. Now, file, it is what? It can be a folder or a storage media. It can be either in physical form or in electronic form. And like any file or folder, any file contains documentation or paper, etc. So audit file, as the name suggests, it will comprise of the audit documentation for any specific engagement. Okay. So we've gone through audit documentation, audit file. Lastly, the most important definition actually, but last but not the least, that's the experienced auditor. You know what? Audit documentation, we have said that we are keeping a record of all the procedures that we have performed, etc., etc. But the documentation should be such. I'll come to this part later, but firstly, what is experience audit? I mean, I was going to say the audit documentation should be of such top quality so that any experienced auditor who may have or may not have any connection with the audit engagement, upon seeing that documentation, he will have an idea. He will have not just an idea, he will have a very good idea about what this engagement is all about, what is the status, what are the results. Okay. So in that ground, so experienced auditor, he's been defined as an individual. He can be either internal or external to the firm who's conducting the audit, and who has practical audit experience and has an understanding of the entire audit process, the business environment of the entity that we are auditing, and the auditing and the financial reporting issues which is relevant to the entity being audited, right? So this is what is defined as an experienced auditor. So these are the most important definitions that we must know, and which is like the building block for this entire essay. Okay. Now we move forward. Okay. So now we come to the purpose of this entire process of maintaining an audit documentation. What is the purpose? Purpose is that, as I already mentioned, audit documentation are nothing but records, but it should be of such quality, or it should be of such it should be able to provide a sufficient and appropriate audit evidence of the basis on which the auditor has drawn his opinion. Meaning, it should be a record of the basis on which the auditor has finally drawn his conclusion and opinion, right? Also, it is an evidence that the audit has been conducted following the standards of auditing and any other legal and regulatory requirement that was expected by the auditor. Okay? Having said so, it is also important to understand that having audit documentation in place makes the entire audit process very simple. Why? Because firstly, it can help the team to plan and perform their the work efficiently, because once you have a stipulated documentation and a proper responsibility delegation which is written down somewhere, performing work becomes much more easier, it becomes much more structured. Also, it helps in the review and supervision work done by a review and supervision which is usually undertaken by the seniors, and who will be reviewing the work which is done by the audit assistant. So the audit assistant, whatever work they are performing, if they document it, it becomes easier for the senior to kind of corroborate it, or find out what else can be done, and to basically to improve the quality of the entire audit. Lastly, not lastly actually, because once you have a documentation in place, as I mentioned, it becomes easier to delegate responsibility, and also people are accountable for what work they have done. Okay. So it also helps the engagement team to be accountable for the work. Then we have these, once you're recording something, when you're recording the entire audit process, it can be, maybe referred to in future audits by either the same auditor or any succeeding auditor. So it becomes easier to, perhaps there is some point which is very unique or intrinsic to that entity, and that maybe the future auditors, they might want to refer to what has been happening before. So it becomes, so it serves as this, record for future audits. Lastly, when we have these audit documentation in place, it becomes very handy when it comes to whether internal control reviews and checks or any external inspection, which has been stipulated by any external agencies or by any legal, regulatory or other requirements. So you can see, as again, before I change the slide, so this is what is the purpose of audit documentation, and keeping these importances in mind, the entire standard of audit documentation was it was framed. Now I have been mentioning audit documentation are records of the entire audit process, of of the evidences obtained, who's doing what work, etc. But exactly what can entail audit documentation? In this slide, you can see some examples. But again, mind you, this is not an exhaustive list. They are just some basic minimum examples that has been given, and which again, and I mean, which is expected, and it is expected that any auditor should be maintaining these bare minimum documents. So what are they? It can be, audit program. What are audit programs? They're like work plans. Then it can be summary of tests performed, like analysis of any procedure that is performed. Then it can be issues memoranda, which is like the memorandum of observation, which is the record of findings record of findings, record of discrepancies. What are the suggestions or remarks by the auditors? Then checklists. Okay, like again, checklist is kind of the steps that is being contemplated while we are planning the audit. And once we are performing each and every step, we are just putting a tick mark that it's done. Then we have letters of confirmation and representation, and it can also include correspondence either with the entity being audited or any third party regarding significant matters. Okay, and so this is it. Okay. Now, you remember we had in the slide where I mentioned three important definitions. I had mentioned about the external auditor. Now, why this, the concept of external auditor comes in, I gave a brief introduction there while I was defining who is an experienced auditor. So why this, point comes in, it is because that, the form, content, and extent of documentation should be of such nature so that it is sufficient for any experienced auditor who has no previous connection with the audit to understand the audit procedure. In terms of what will the experienced auditor understand? He will understand by looking at the documentation, he should be able to understand the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures performed to comply with the standards of auditing. Upon looking at the audit documentation, the experienced auditor should be able to understand the results of the audit procedures that we have performed and the audit evidences that we have obtained. Lastly, by looking at the audit documentation, the experienced auditor should be able to understand the significant matters that have been experienced during performing of the audit procedures, the conclusions that has been reached, and any significant professional judgment that had to be made during the course of the audit. Okay. So, okay. Now, this essay, like I said, it's like a guiding light. It's the torch that shows us the path that what exactly we should record and what is, which is absolutely necessary to record, and in which areas we should use our judgment to what we should record. So firstly, the essay, what it does is it guides us on these important aspects that we have to record, identifying that we record what. Suppose we are testing any specific items or any matter, okay, which is being tested. We have to record the identifying characteristics of those specific items or matters tested. Like, let me be more specific. Suppose audit procedure that I'm performing entails, an observation procedure being held. So when I'm undertaking any observation procedure, where it can be a stock verification, where it can be, physically counting certain inventories. So in that case, what can be an identifying characteristic of that audit procedure? For example, I have to record in case of an observation procedure, I have to record, number one, the date where the procedure was held, what is the item which is being observed, who is conducting the observation procedure, and the place. These can be the identifying characteristics. Similarly, where I'm trying to, I'm trying to, study and analyze certain entity procured purchase, entity procured purchases. So there, where I'm studying the list of purchases, I will record what, like the entity generated purchase number, maybe the vendors, the date when the orders were placed. These are identifying characteristics which must be recorded always. Okay. Then, what is important to record is who performed the audit work and the date when such work was completed. And lastly, who reviewed the audit work. Again, both conducting the audit process is important, as well as review and supervision. So, who reviewed the audit work performed and the date and extent of such review. These are the bare minimum things that are expected that we should be recording under all circumstances. Okay. And along with that, we can document certain things, like which I'll be discussing now. Like the auditor can document discussions which are made with, on significant matters with the management and those charged with governance and others. Like, for example, there's a meeting that the auditor is having with the entity's management, and some minutes are prepared of that meeting. So, minutes prepared by entities personal and confirmed by the auditor can form a part of my audit documentation. Also, auditor can include, abstracts or, copies of entities record as his audit documentation. Like, for example, I'm kind of going through I'm checking in a sale, a particular sale of a property. In that case, the entity's, sale deed or, the purchase deed, extracts of that, relevant extracts of that can also form a part of my audit documentation, even though this entity, this record belongs to the entity. Okay. And also, when I'm maintaining my audit documentation, now a question may arise that, if I'm at the initial stage, I'm planning the audit, and maybe I have prepared a checklist based on the initial set of information that was available to me. Now, after 1 or 2 months, there are certain circumstances which has caused me to revise my audit plan. So in that cases, will I also include my old work plan as a part of my audit documentation? Standard says no, you need not. Anything which is, any, drafts or audit documentation which has been subsequently revised, or there has been some typographical error which has been detected and it's been removed. So those discarded documents need not be included or need not be a part of the audit documentation. Okay. All right. Now at this point, I'm discussing certain important terms that I had earlier shown you. Like, let me take you back to the slide where I have seen that the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures performed to comply with the essays and applicable legal and regulatory requirement. Okay. So certain terms I have used, like significant matters, then significant professional judgment, like the external auditor should be able to understand significant matters arising during audit, significant professional judgments that I have to make during the audit. So the quality of the audit documentation is such that the experienced auditor or any person who is not having any previous connection with the audit, to understand those aspects by just looking at the audit documentation. So in that case, there is a lot of responsibility upon me as an auditor to record these matters impeccably. So in that case, when we come to significant matters, we've been using this term significant matters quite often. So what does significant matters entail, or what aspect of significant matters should be recorded? So to document, now I'm discussing, so to document the characteristics of significant matters, the following should be recorded. So what is to be recorded? Like maybe matters that give rise to any kind of significant risk. maybe I've noticed some kind of red flag, some transactions which look suspicious, maybe, a new vendor with a big amount, or maybe some transactions which are being undertaken, or which are taking place in weekends or holidays. So these are red flags. So they are matters giving rise to significant risk. Or maybe there is some kind of dispute within the management, or there is some kind of litigation against the entity. So they are significant matters which can give rise to significant risk. So I will record those matters. Okay. Next, what I will record is I will record the results of audit procedures. Okay, the results of the audit procedures that I have performed, where financial statements could be materially misstated, where the auditor has a doubt that financial statements may be materially misstated. Significant matters require me to record those results or those audit procedure and the results obtained thereof, where in cases where financial statements could be materially misstated, or under circumstances where the auditor had formed a assessment of the risk of material misstatement, but then subsequently something came to his notice where he had to revise his previous assessment of material misstatement and the auditor's responses to that risk. It may be a circumstance where, the auditor had the assessment of the risk of material misstatement was very high, and subsequently the auditor, upon performing procedures, he, came to the conclusion that no, it is not so. In that cases also, we have to record the results of the audit procedures, and also vice versa. Okay. So basically, wherever I have to record the audit procedures and the results thereof in detail, where there is a chance of my financial statement being materially misstated, or there is a need of revision of the auditor's previous assessment of risk of material misstatement. Okay. Also, I have to record those circumstances that cause the auditor difficulty in applying his audit procedures freely. Like maybe the entity is not cooperating with the auditor, not providing the documentation in time. Frequently, they are changing their records, what they're providing to the auditor. Okay. I have to record those circumstances. And lastly, the findings upon performing the audit procedure that could result in a modification of the audit opinion, or an inclusion of EOM, or emphasis of matter paragraph, in the auditor's report. Maybe emphasis of matter paragraph need not result in a modification, but emphasis of matter paragraph is actually included in the auditor's report, where there is a matter which is already disclosed in the financial statements and the notes thereof, but it is of such importance that mandates the auditor to highlight this in his audit report. Okay. So if there is certain instances like that, maybe any kind of ongoing litigation, or any kind of maybe some kind of theft that happened, which did not result in a lot of financial loss, but I think it becomes important for the auditor to record this. Maybe it was disclosed in the notes to account, or there is some kind of a contingent liability which is disclosed in the financial statement, which again puts a responsibility on the auditor to record it in his audit report. So these aspects we have to document, and these are exactly what I mean by significant matters. Okay. Again, I have been also saying that the experienced auditor should be able to understand professional judgment. Now, professional judgment, we all know, is very subjective and intrinsic to a particular auditor. And these matters, which are not really, I cannot substantiate them, it becomes very difficult to document them, right? How can I, if I'm using some judgment, it becomes very difficult. I mean, recording a fact and recording a judgment is quite different, and that is where we have to pay extra attention while recording professional judgment. Okay. So when we are recording professional judgment, we are expected to record, we have to record the rationale of the auditor's conclusion when a requirement of a particular standard says that the auditor shall consider certain important facts or factors, and that consideration by the auditor is significant in the context of the particular engagement. So that is what is the auditor. So basically this means is what is the auditor's rational, or what is his judgment when he considers certain instances of certain facts and factors, and after that what are his views on that. Okay, so that he will record. Then also, what are the basis of the auditor's conclusion on the reasonableness of areas of subjective judgment. Lastly, for example, for the basis of auditor's conclusions about the authenticity of a document, where initially he had, highlighted that document as being susceptible to forgery or risk, but upon further investigation, he has come to the conclusion that no, the document is authentic. So, what are his, thought process that led him to believe that no, this document, upon performing the further investigative procedure, that document is authentic. So what is his thought process? So when I'm, again, the main conclusion is that when I'm, see, these are very textual terms I have used because this is what has been given in the essay, but the main crux is when I'm recording judgment, I have to basically record the thought process. So for that, what are the procedures that the auditor has conducted that has ultimately led him to a particular conclusion. So that is what has to be recorded. Okay, done. Again, certain important aspects which I have to cover here and which is mentioned in the standard of auditing, that often the standards mention that we have to comply with the requirements of the standard of auditing. But having said so, now why the requirements of standard of auditing is something that will help the auditor achieve his objective. Okay, but now it is not possible that all the requirements of the essay will be applicable to me, right? It will not be. What the introductory standard of auditing, or the implementation guides to the various standards, they also mention that the auditor can only comply with the requirements which are relevant to him in a particular circumstance. Like, what are relevant? Now the question arises that what exactly, when is a requirement not relevant? A requirement will not be relevant when, suppose, an entire standard of auditing is not applicable to me, like the entity that I'm auditing that does not have a requirement for an internal audit function. So in that case, SA 610, this becomes irrelevant. Also, suppose it can also, requirement may also not be relevant when the requirement is conditional and the condition itself does not exist in my case. For example, in the essay 700 series, where it deals with the auditor's report, maybe there may not be a circumstance that will require me to modify or qualify my audit opinion. So in that case, the entire essays on modification, qualification, adverse opinion, qualified opinion, that will not hold applicable for me. So basically, you have to, the auditor has to ensure compliance with relevant requirement, and that is what they are to document. They are to document that they have complied with the relevant requirement. Okay, so in such circumstances, suppose an auditor is required to deviate from that relevant requirement, so what he's expected to record is that how the alternate audit procedures were performed that ultimately help to achieve the objective of the audit, and what are the reasons of that departure. Okay, so whenever there is a departure from, so again, I'll just conclude this: an auditor is required to comply with relevant requirements of a standard, and in case there is a departure from that relevant requirement, he will have to record the alternate audit procedures that he performed to achieve the objectives of the standard of auditing, and what are the reasons for that departure. Okay, this is one circumstance. Another circumstance is that often we have come across, that is, some matters may arise after the date of the audit report, like after the auditor and after the auditor has signed the audit report. There is certain circumstance, certain facts which come into the forefront, which were not disclosed before. In that case, what is the auditor expected, what documentation is expected to be maintained? Of course, we have to record what were the circumstances encountered which has resulted in the auditor making certain changes after the date of the auditor's report. What are the new and additional audit procedures performed, the evidences obtained, and the conclusions drawn with respect to this new development. And lastly, when and by whom the resulting changes in the audit documentations were made. Okay. So these are actually, these are all the special cases and special circumstances which have been prescribed in the standard of auditing, and what are the basic bare minimum that we are expected to record under those circumstances. Okay. Now, certain important aspects, like we've been dealing with SA 230, but often what we ignore is, and this is what most of us miss out on, and this is actually the most important part for you, so I request the participants to pay attention, that there are certain requirements that is expected from us auditors. And this is not given in SA 230, but it is given in Standard of Quality Control 1, SQC 1. And they are mandatory for the auditors, mind you. Okay. So what are they? See, I have already defined what is an audit file. So audit documentation is to be assembled in an audit file, and there is a time limit for that. It should not be later than 60 days after the date of the auditor's report. Okay. So whatever final you're collating all the documents, putting it into the folder, or either an e-folder or a physical folder if you have, that has to be done and has to be completed not later than 60 days after the date of the auditor's report. And during this time of compilation, only administrative changes can be allowed. Like, what are administrative changes? Like, you're like discarding superseded documents, you're cross-referencing documents, maybe, applying post-its, or, giving reference, go back to this section, those part, or go back to this particular checklist dated this. Then you're, documenting the evidence that auditor has discussed and agreed upon relevant matters, and, agreed upon after, at the time of signing the auditor's report, or, the auditor during this time, he can be ticking the checklist, completing whatever, what are the, workflows that have been completed. So he may be completing that. So these are the changes which are allowed during this assembly process. Okay. And another important thing that most of us, I think in 60% of the cases, we are not aware of it, or we don't follow this, that is the retention period of audit engagement documents. All these documents, right from my engagement letter to the initial work plan, to the work delegation, the checklist, what are the procedures performed, what are the significant matters, professional judgment, etc. All this, and of course followed by the opinion, the base of the opinion, and a copy of the audit report. Everything has to be retained for a period of at least 7 years from the date of the auditor's report or the group auditor's report, whichever is later. Okay. So this 7 years, so even the auditor has an obligation upon themselves to maintain audit documentation of a client for at least 7 years. Okay. And this is mentioned in SQC 1. So these are the key takeaways, that your audit assembly audit assembly file, assembly of the audit file has to be completed within 60 days after the date of the auditor's report, and the retention period is 7 years. Okay. And lastly, of course, there's another, important point mentioned in SQC1, that audit documentation is, of course, the property of the auditor. He's expected to maintain confidentiality at all times, except when he is required to cooperate or coordinate with any legal or regulatory body. Okay. So that is what he shall maintain secrecy at all time. So these are the important, provisions that have been given in SA 230. And also, because it is such an important, aspect of the entire audit process, I think I should discuss one important thing. It is very important from the practical perspective. That is, what happens if we don't maintain quality audit documentation, or we don't maintain, there was this definition, the purpose of audit documentation, we have to maintain a sufficient and appropriate record. So if we don't maintain a sufficient and appropriate record, what happens is, see, your quality of audit documentation, it dwindles. So what happens is, if an auditor is particularly held responsible for any kind of lapse, okay, so the boards and NAFRA does not come after an auditor for lapse of audit documentation. But what happens is, if there is any kind of lapse in their audit report, and there is investigation which is conducted by NAFRA, or the disciplinary committee, they are investigating a particular case, from that lapse they will actually come down to the audit documentation maintenance aspect. They will see that a particular audit documentation is not maintained properly, or is not of the standard that is expected by the institute. So that is when the auditor will be held guilty of professional misconduct under gross negligence. So this is, I think it's mentioned under clause 7 of part 1 of the second schedule of the Chartered Accountant Act 1949, where he can be either reprimanded, like he may be removed from the register of members depending upon the intensity of the offense, or there can be an imposition of fine of up to rupees 5 lakh for an individual, and up to 10 times the fees received for firm, or minimum of rupees 5 lakh. Okay, so these are the consequences. So I was going through certain disciplinary cases that have been tried by the institute's disciplinary committee. There actually non-maintenance of audit documentation is never a starting point, okay, for a particular case or a complaint. But actually, upon investigating a particular lapse, these people, they ultimately come down to the crux, that is the basic, whether he has excise due diligence, he's not maintained audit documentation, and that is where the auditor can be held liable. And similarly, for listed, if we are conducting audit for listed entities, sometimes there are certain prescribed audit documentation list, checklist that is prescribed by the specific legal or regulation, or the regulatory requirement that mandates you to keep certain form of checklist or certain form of documents. That also. And in case of listed entity, if there is any lapse, that is where NAFRA comes into the picture under section 132(4) of the Companies Act 2013. And of course, there is again fine, and then for individuals, it's minimum 1 lakh, but may extend to 5 lakhs, 5 times of the fees received. For firms, it is minimum 5 lakh, but may extend to 10 times of the fees received. And of course, the individual or the firm can be debarred from conducting audit for a maximum of 10 years. Okay, so keeping these things in mind, we have to be very mindful while maintaining our audit documentation. Of course, study the standard of auditing well, followed by the implementation guide. Like, I'm showing you one thing. This is my last slide. So this is an illustrative working paper format, okay? And this I've taken from the implementation guide of SA 230. Here, see, this is not mandatory, but it is recommended that a certain if you're observing a procedure or you're conducting any kind of special audit procedure, this is the bare minimum things that you should maintain, like the name of the entity, what is the nature of the assignment, what is the audit firm's name, article assistant's name or the audit assistant's name, date, reviewed by, for which period, which unit, if entity has a headquarter or unit, what are the areas, then what are the balances as per the books of account, general ledger, if there is if there is any kind of difference between the amount which is actually given in the which they have already recorded in the tally, and which is available in the vouchers, what are the reasons for those differences, then what are our observations, what are our special notes, and what is the conclusion of the entire process. So this is given, and I request everyone to, after this session, you may read the implementation guide that is in much more detail. Of course, standard is there, and I have covered the important provisions. You can again cross check, but implementation guide, it is available in the institute website. Please go through it. So with this, I come to an end to this session. And do we have time for some question answers? I have to see how many participants are there. I have certain question answers. Chimpu ji, do we have
हाँ मैडम,
time? Do we have
आपने कर
time?
सकते हैं, 10 मिनट कर सकते हैं अभी।
अच्छा, हम लोग पार्टिसिपेंट्स कितने हैं?
अभी 15 हैं टोटल।
15 है। अच्छा, ठीक है, एक बार देख लेते हैं। I have certain questions, तो हम लोग ये I think cover कर सकते हैं। Participants 15 है। So I'm just walking you through some MCQs, and if the participants can give me the correct answer in the chat, then we can just move ahead. Okay. So do we start? So I'll just tell you, we'll not do all the questions, but some of them we'll do. Okay. Okay, tell me from question number 2, the advantage of audit documentation is that in case of regulatory inspection at the entity, audit documentation can also serve as a substitute for entity's accounting record. I have not covered this point, that's why I'm asking you that can audit documentation be a substitute for entity's accounting record? I'm checking the chat. No, Amit Bansali ji, no, okay. And yes, that's the answer. It cannot be a substitute. Audit documentation can never serve as a substitute for entity's accounting record, okay? Okay, I think this point I've covered. So this is, yes, the auditor can assemble the audit documentation and audit file and complete the administrative process of assembling the final audit file on a timely basis after the date of the auditor's report. This is true. Okay. So, this, after assembly of the final audit file has been completed, the auditor may delete or discard audit documentation of any nature before the end of its retention period. Can he do that? Before the retention period of 7 years, can it be discarded? Rakesh ji says no. Correct. Correct. And even Amit Bansali ji says no. Okay. These parts I have covered. Let me again find some other questions. Recording identifying characteristics serves a number of purposes. Identifying characteristics will not vary with the nature of the audit procedure and the item or matter tested. Identifying characteristics will not vary with the nature of the audit procedure and the item or matter tested. Identifying characteristics of any, suppose, just think of this, like I had given this example, observation, you're observing a particular process, you're observing a physical count of inventories. So the identifying characteristics in that observation procedure will be who is performing that audit procedure, what is the nature of the items that is being, of whose the count we are conducting, and the item or the matter tested. So will identifying characteristics vary with the nature of the audit procedure? Yes or no? Identifying characteristics will not vary with the nature of the audit. Will identifying characteristic be constant? Always? False. Correct. Correct. Okay. Okay. Documentation is limited to records prepared by auditors and will not include records such as minutes of meetings prepared by entities personal and agreed by auditor. True or false? This we've covered. True or false? Can my audit documentation include certain entities' records like minutes? No, it is true. I have already I'll just take you to that slide. Just a second. Let me take you to that slide. Audit documentation will include document discussion of significant matters with the management. It includes abstracts or copies of entities' record. Okay, so please take care of this. Okay, SQC1, we've covered this point. Let's see if you remember. SQC1 provides that unless otherwise specified by law or regulation, audit documentation is the property of the auditor. True or false? Audit documentation is the property of the auditor. True. True, correct. All right. Again, just for a quick recap, what is the retention period of the audit engagement documents? Because this is important. 7. Correct. Correct. Okay. All right. An important factor in determining the form, content, and extent of audit documentation of significant matter is the extent of dash in performing the work and evaluating the results. An important factor in determining the form, content, and extent of audit documentation of significant matter is the extent of, what would be the correct answer? Let's see. No. It is point B, professional judgment exercised. An important factor in determining the form, content, and extent of audit documentation of significant matter is the extent of professional judgment exercised in performing the work and evaluating the result. Okay. Okay, lastly, just tell me, auditors shall prepare audit documentation on a regular basis or on a timely basis? What is the term we use frequently? Point B. Timely, correct. Timely, correct. Okay. Okay, now tell me this. Because we have gone through this definition, experienced auditor is an individual who has audit experience and a reasonable understanding of audit procedure. What understanding? Point A, that is practical. Correct. He has a practical audit experience. All right. Okay, which of the following statement is incorrect? SA 230 is not to be applied where other SAs prescribe the specific audit documentation, or SA 230 is to be adopted as necessary when applied to audits of other historical financial information. Which of these two statements are incorrect? Correct. Point A. SA 230 is not to be applied where other SAs prescribe the specific audit documentation. Okay. Okay, just tell me this. We've covered this point. SQC1 requires firms to establish policies and procedure for timely completion of assembly of audit files. What is the appropriate time limit within which to complete the assembly of final audit file after the date of the auditor's report? We've covered this. Tell me. Correct. 60 days. Okay. Right. Okay, tell me this. This is an important definition. We've covered this. What is the definition of what I mean? This point is where we have discussed what should be the nature, form, and content of the audit documentation. The audit documentation should be sufficient to enable an experienced auditor having no previous connection with the audit to understand the NTE of audit procedures performed to comply with essays and the applicable legal and regulatory requirement, the results of the audit procedures performed and the audit evidences obtained, and significant matters arising during the audit, conclusions reached, and significant professional judgments made in reaching those conclusions. All of the above or none of the above? All of the above. All of the above. Correct. All of the above. Okay, now tell me, like we have, noted this down that if we have studied this special case, if the auditor performs new or additional audit procedures or draw new conclusions after the date of the auditor's report, what shall he document? Circumstances encountered, new or additional audit procedures perform, evidences obtained, conclusions drawn, and their effect on auditor's report, when and by whom the resulting changes were made, or all of the above. We covered this special case. Circumstances, all of the above. Correct, all of the above. And okay. This also, we have discussed, this point also we have discussed. See, select the circumstances in which it is appropriate to prepare audit documentation relating to the use of professional judgment, include where the matters and the judgments are significant. The basis of the auditor's conclusion on reasonableness of areas of subjective judgment, the basis of the auditor's conclusion about authenticity of document where further investigation causes the auditor to believe document may not be authentic. When SA 701 applies, the auditor's determination of key audit matters or determination that there are no key audit matters to be communicated.
आरूपा जी, क्वेश्चन आंसर और भी ज्यादा है क्या?
नहीं नहीं, ये लास्ट स्लाइड है, हो गया ये वाला करके बस, वी आर डन. Yes, all of the above. All of the above. Correct. All of the above. Okay. So with this, we come to an end. So I request the attendees, I thank them for attending the session and also request them to go back and study SA 230 along with the implementation guide. Okay. And if there are any questions, we can take it up later. Okay. You can connect with me. Okay. Over to you, Chimpu Bhaiya.
Thank you, Arupa ji.
Mm-hmm.
Today is a fantastic session. We learn about audit documentation, how to record audit work, evidence, and other conclusions to audit support, opinion to ensure the companion, review the ability of the auditor and other document, what is its importance, अगर अपने इसको मेंटेन नहीं करते तो इसका क्या कॉम्प्लिकेसिटी हो सकता है। तो 1 घंटा का सेशन तो काफी नहीं है, बट हमने काफी कुछ जाना आज आपसे। एंड थैंक यू ऑडियंस फॉर पेशेंट शेयरिंग एंड पार्टिसिपेटिंग फॉर द टुडेज गोल्डन चर्चा। थैंक्स टू ऑल।
Thank you.
And we conclude our sessions. Thanks to all.
Thank you.